With the dawn of the 20th century, the Jewish community in the Los Angeles region began to blossom. As a result of its increasing numbers, the founding fathers of Jewish Los Angeles dedicated themselves to developing a foundation for a joyous Jewish community in this burgeoning metropolis. One area in which these men focused: building institutions to address the healthcare needs of Angelenos. And one such institution,
the Los Angeles Sanitarium, which became known very quickly as the City of Hope. And it established a sanitarium in Duarte, which is just east of downtown Los Angeles and still exists today as the City of Hope Medical Center.
And over the last century plus, the City of Hope has developed into one of North America's leading medical institutions. One area in which the City of Hope particularly shines: hematology.
Hematology at the City of Hope is predominantly about cancers of the blood and the immune system. So diseases like leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, anything that is malignant that involves the blood or the immune system.
Now, prior to the mid-1970s, the prognosis after a diagnosis of such blood cancers was not a good one.
Most patients with this diagnosis succumb to their disease.
But around this time, the City of Hope became one of 6 medical centers in the nation to offer what has become known as bone marrow transplantation.
So leukemia is a cancer of the bone marrow. When it develops there, it crowds out the normal cells that are in the marrow that make our blood and make our white cells that fight infection, the red cells that give us energy, and platelets that keep our blood makes our blood clot when it's appropriate to do so. So if the leukemia is crowding out all those cells, a person is very susceptible to infection. They have no energy, absent transfusions, and they have a bleeding risk. So the idea behind a transplant is to get rid of all the leukemia. And we do that with in those days, very high doses of radiation and chemotherapy. The problem was that if we eliminated the cancer, we were probably eliminating all the normal cells that might still be there also, so we had to replace them. And so the replacement came from stem cells that we obtained from either a brother or a sister. We really liked having people come to see us from large families. So in those days, Catholic, Orthodox Jewish, Mormon, who would often have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 siblings. The more siblings there were, the better the chances are that we'd find a match in the family.
So what is a match? Well, the donor and the recipient share a very specific set of genes that allows the patient to accept stem cells from the donor.
The problem we clearly faced was, if you didn't have a match, then for many patients that we saw, there was no chance of survival. And so in the 1980s, a number of people got together and decided, well, let's see if we can get volunteers to join a registry, and we will search them, look at their DNA to see if they match our patient. We knew that what we were looking for in the matching was a limited number of genes. So the idea was, if you had a large enough registry, and there were only so many genes you were looking at, you might begin to find donors or matches for people outside the family.
Now, in terms of that bone marrow donor registry,
when it began, had maybe a few hundred people in it, and now there's well over 15 million people worldwide. So when we search for a donor for a patient, we're looking at all those registries. And we have a huge effort here at the City of Hope to increase the number of people who are in the registries. Some of them are ethnically focused.
Ethnically focused? What does that mean?
So when the registry in the United States began back in the 1980s, it was focused in Minnesota. And so you might predict that if you're starting in a population that is Caucasian, Scandinavian, that's a certain set of genes that are going to be well represented. But if you're somebody who's African American, live in Louisiana, that your genes may not be adequately represented. And so we've gone to a lot of work to increase the registry's numbers in a more focused way. So Ashkenazi Jewish, African American, Asian, Latin American.
So is it more likely that an Ashkenazi Jew will match another Ashkenazi Jew? Is there some type of genetic connection between Ashkenazi Jews that increases the likelihood of match?
It's very common for an Ashkenazi Jewish person to have an Ashkenazi Jewish donor, but it's far from exclusive. We had one rather dramatic case a couple of years ago of a young Ashkenazi Jewish man whose mother was a Holocaust survivor and had survived, whose match was a non-Ashkenazi German citizen. Now, the irony of that was not lost on anybody, and the emotion of the moment was not lost on anybody, but it shows you that we're just looking at the genes.
About 20 years ago at my old work, I gave blood to be a bone marrow donor. And then, I guess about 2 or 3 years later, I got this email saying that I was a potential match for a 12-year-old girl who had leukemia. I think somehow I knew she was Ashkenazi Jewish, and I was very excited. But then I wound up learning that I wasn't an ultimate match. So I'm wondering what happened. Why was I not a match?
When we are looking for an unrelated donor, we'll look in the registry to see if there is typing already done that looks close to our patient. And when we see a number of potential donors, we'll ask for a blood sample to be sent to us from each one of those people. Rather than doing it one at a time and lengthening the time, we ask for up to 10. We get those samples, we run them in our laboratory, and we look at our testing to see, among those 10 who look good, who look the best. And sometimes it's the matching itself. Sometimes we have 2 people who match exactly, but their blood groups are different. So one thing to point out, in addition to replacing a person's stem cells and their immune system, if their blood types are different, they're going to switch. So if you came into this world as blood group O and your donor is blood group A, you're going to have the rest of your life as blood group A. So sometimes we'll use that. Sometimes the age of the donor. We often will pick the younger donor. So all these things factor into it.
Okay, I may not have been a donor, but on a yearly basis, over 600 individuals donate their bone marrow to a City of Hope patient needing a transplant. So how does the process work?
So for the patient who comes to us for a transplant, our job is to try to eliminate every last leukemia cell that's present in the body. And we do that by administering varying doses of chemotherapy, sometimes with radiation also. So after about a week of receiving the therapy, and it's been completed, that's when we go and get the cells from the donor. For the donor, we can collect the cells one of 2 ways. We can take them to the operating room and put needles in the hip bones, which is where the richest marrow is, and in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we can remove enough marrow to have enough cells that would replenish the marrow in the recipient. The other way we do it is these stem cells, as we learned scientifically, actually circulate in the bloodstream. So we will sometimes give a medicine that will push more of these stem cells out into the bloodstream and then collect it from the donor's vein. Once we collect those cells, we, like we did with the marrow, take it over to the patient's bedside, hang it up by the bed, and then watch it drip into the patient, and the cells will find their way into the bone marrow. In its appearance, it's very undramatic. It looks like you're hanging a bag of blood. But in its meaning, it is very significant. I think most patients actually think of their lives as their life before the transplant, and then, God willing, their long life after transplant, but we count from there. And it takes about 12 days for the blood counts, which go down to 0, to begin starting to show numbers again. And it's a pretty magical day when you see the white count going from 0 to a few hundred, to 1,000, to a couple of thousand, recognizing that everything that's now being made in that person's bloodstream came from the donor stem cells. And I've been doing this a long time, and I can still tell you that there's still a buzz, excitement, relief when we see the blood counts coming up in a person, because we know that there's been a take, it wasn't rejected, and that there's now an opportunity for that person to be well and go home.
And with today's advances, the rejection rates fall below 5%. Hence, in more than 95% of the cases where the transplant works,
when a donation works, it means that that patient will go on with their life in remission with the leukemia or the lymphoma or the myelodysplasia, whatever the disease was, left behind, and that their blood is now normal blood but derived from somebody else's stem cells. A successful transplant for us is curing the leukemia, having no complications that limit what a person wants to do, and returning to normal life.
Now, while all successful transplants provide a reason for tremendous joy, one such case is particularly noteworthy due to the celebrity of the patient. You may recognize the name Stephen Bochco. Born into an Ashkenazi Jewish family in New York City, Bochco became one of the nation's most prolific and celebrated television producers, helming such long-lived series as Hill Street Blues, L.A. Law, Doogie Howser, NYPD Blue, and Murder in the First, winning a whopping 10 Emmys for his work.
So Stephen Bochco came to us with an incredibly rare form of leukemia. We see people like him with that disease here at the City of Hope, but it's not very frequent. In his particular case, it was very advanced because it involved his whole marrow. It was a disease that's related to leukemia, and it behaved like leukemia. So we came up with a treatment regimen for him that was focused on trying to get his marrow into remission, which we did, but we knew that that remission was going to be short-lived. Something else needed to be done. And despite his age, and despite his not having a donor in his family, we were able to keep him in remission long enough to find a donor who matched him well enough to then take him through a transplant. Now, when I first began doing this, we rarely, if ever, transplanted anybody over the age of 30. And so part of the progress we have made in the field has been the ability to take care of people with diseases that may be cured by a transplant at older and older ages. So we crossed the 40-year-old barrier, then the 50-year-old barrier, 60, and now people are coming to us in their 70s. So Mr. Bochco's donor was a young man from New Jersey but was living in the Bay Area. Well, in this particular case, both Mr. Bochco and his donor were of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. It didn't surprise me so much that two Ashkenazi Jews ended up matching. I think the efforts that have been made to increase the representation of Ashkenazi Jewish genes in the registry has made that more likely. There was a time when we had difficulty finding donors for Ashkenazi Jewish people, and now I think that's so much less.
Now, when the patient and the donor are not related, protocols have been developed so that neither party knows the identity of the other, and the anonymity is maintained for 1 year, only broken if both parties consent.
At the City of Hope, we have been conducting patient reunions for nearly 40 years. About a decade or more ago, we began to help patients meet their donor for the first time.
So in the case of Stephen Bochco, he and his donor, 25-year-old John Kane, chose to meet in person. But,
Doctor, I was wondering if Mr. Bochco's donor, John Kane, was aware of Mr. Bochco's stature before he met him.
At the time of Mr. Kane meeting Mr. Bochco, Mr. Kane really had no idea who his recipient really was and how well known he was to so many people. I think his awareness happened when he came to the City of Hope.
watch.
So it is now my honor to introduce Stephen Bochco to his stem cell donor, John Kane, who came from San Francisco to meet the person whose life he helped save.
Thank you. I think this is the first time that I've ever been to City of Hope where I didn't have to roll up my sleeve. This is obviously a very special day. Meeting John means the world to me. Having my dear friends here, my family, my children, my doctor, Stephen, Jennifer, who is such a great nurse, all the personnel here at City of Hope. And as far as my feelings towards John, you know, as I've said before, there's a reason why I now go to strip clubs every night. Because I have this, what are you now, 25? I have a 25-year-old young man's DNA.
It's interesting when, you know, you're a donor and you see one side of the process. You know, I went to New York to get a physical. I did a bunch of testing in San Francisco, gave my donation in New York. That's kind of what I saw. And then to see the two different sides of it meet here, you know, for the first time is pretty incredible. And obviously the impact that it's had, you know, for my patient and his family, you know, to extend the amount of time that he can share with his family is obviously one of the big drivers behind why I did this. As was said before, I lost a grandfather. I'm very lucky to have my 3 living grandparents here today, sitting right over here. As well as my parents, my brother, and my cousins, who we're very close with as well. All could join today, and I think that really speaks to the importance of family to me. And you know, it's touching to me to see that, you know, that same importance of family is reflected on the other end as well. I think that's really special.
I think one of the things I've recognized in all the years I've been doing this at City of Hope is how many people are involved in the saving of one life. The identifying a donor is certainly one part of it, but it really takes hundreds of people, nurses, physicians, specialists, laboratory people. And that's why when we have that transplant reunion every year, it's a celebration not only of that person's cure, hopeful cure, but also of the hundreds, if not thousands of people who have been a part of saving that life. You know, there's a Talmudic concept that if you save one life, you save a whole world. I think we really believe that at the City of Hope, because we know that when we save one person's life, many are affected. If it's a parent, those children are affected because they have their parent. If it's a parent of a child who has cancer, they don't lose that child. And that extends to friends, spouses, grandparents, co-workers, sometimes strangers.
If you are interested in becoming a bone marrow donor, it's much easier than when I had to donate blood for analysis. All you need to provide today is a cheek swab. And how do you do that? You simply contact the program Be The Match, which you can find online either through the City of Hope's website at coh.org or the website for Be The Match at bethematch.org. Reporting from the City of Hope, I'm Brad Pomerantz.